Hello and welcome to the national curriculum where we have, according to the stats, I believe, been saying 10 million words per podcast. Hang on, that might be cumulative. I'm Josh Parish, Teo Pellizzeri with us once again. Good evening to you, Teo.
Very good evening, Josh.
And a big warm welcome return for Ante Jukic back into the fold. How are you, Ante?
I'm well, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to be back. We've got a big weekend to break down in the A-League. We'll start over in Adelaide, where this was pretty old school as far as quote-unquote original derbies go. Not since the days of Kevin Muscat barreling John Cosmina off a plastic Bunnings chair have I seen so much spice in this fixture, Teo.
Look, it was everything that the free-to-air game needed, and it was everything that this current season needed. The drama and sort of spite in the game was fantastic. It's exactly what the competition needs to bring back the disengaged people or the lapsed people. And as far as building for a new audience, if that's your first taste of A-League, if you were just giving it a go for the first time, then I don't think you're going to be too concerned about the quality or lack thereof, or the helter-skelter nature of the way the game played out, because of the drama and the entertainment value that came out of it. From a purely footballing point of view, I think Victory were pretty good value for their result. I know I tipped against them last week in their performance against Perth. It felt like a lot longer than a week ago. And to be honest, that felt like more of a continuation of the momentum growing out of how easily they dispatched Brisbane, because it seems as though the aberration of the Perth result didn't linger with the team for very long.
Very bang crash wallop stuff, aren't they? I mean, we love our footy down here in South Australia and Victoria, so pretty fitting that this game was up and at 'em, quite chaotic.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I could just really take that at face value, Teo. Like, it's boom crash opera is fine and it works on a certain level in the A-League, but like, what's really going to create a lasting, connection to the A-League?
People's teams winning in dramatic fashion. I think for the neutral maybe, and this is kind of the hard sell that the league has as a national competition to people who don't support either team. But I certainly think if you're taking care of the biggest fan base in the league by that was the first time that Victory had been the Saturday night Channel 10 game, and it was a bit of a surprise we'd had to wait until the fourth game of the season for that to be the case.
Oh, that didn't have West United on set. Oh, sorry, it was they showed the Sydney Derby on there. My bad.
Yeah, so this is the first time they'd had that national audience, and I think that if you're again talking about disengaged fan bases that have been away and have the potential to grow, then I mean we were waxing lyrical about the fans coming back and it only being 13,000 for the Brisbane game 2 weeks ago. And now this is the sort of emotional appeal, which is again going to bring people back. And I think the travelling Victory fans deserve a lot of credit for that as well, with the way that they created a presence within Cooper Stadium, and also the club really lent into that with what they had to go through to get into South Australia.
For me, the biggest thing about the A-League being compelling or otherwise is whether it feels like it matters. And that game felt like it mattered a lot to the supporters and the managers and the players. There were a lot of big tackles, a lot of yellow cards, a lot of fans getting up and at players when they were taking throw-ins and corners. It was good rivalry stuff. I did have to laugh when Jake Brimmer was taking a corner from the right-hand side, and you could clearly see in the front row a girl directly behind him just going, wacka. But she was just grinning the entire time. So, it was a lot of fun for me, especially coming on the heels of that Western United Brisbane game, which I think lacked a little bit of that kind of passion and a little bit of those stakes. The atmosphere was fantastic at Hindmarsh. I thought it was good entertainment value on a Saturday night.
Yeah, Hindmarsh is probably, outside of Parramatta, the best stadium for football in this country. And especially how the angle, let's say the angle of elevation on the stands, let's say especially the main stand at Hindmarsh, like you're right over the pitch, and when it gets loud, it gets really loud there, despite the open spaces. So, and that was like you do make a good point, Josh. It did matter to everyone there, and the fans really fed off that, and there was kind of an interdependence in terms of feeding off each other's energy. But the thing about it on a footballing level, like it just followed the classic Liga pattern of safe pass, bad touch, big tackle. Like it was just rinse and repeat for the first 40 to 50 minutes of the game, and it only really kind of settled down once Victory scored, because then they could breathe and absorb.
Would you have had a higher opinion of the game if Brimmer scores his open net, or if Rojas converts either of his chances? I mean, was that hanging over your opinion of the game, though, that Victory
not really, because
lacked a bit of quality when the opportunities presented to them?
It wasn't necessarily about quality, but the circumstances in which the quality has to manifest itself, like from a standpoint of realization. Like you look at how the bulk of Victory's chances were generated, like it's not exactly different to what we've seen in any period over the past 4 to 5 years. But I think at least Victory, let's say the fan base, from what I gauge, it's like the fan base has a more, let's say, a more welcoming understanding of what they are, and that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Victory fans are really going to hold on to their, high-minded ideals about, Ange's imprint and styles of football when they're winning games, especially after they've been basically bottom of the league for 2 years. So it was a good away day. I think just winning is pretty much everything, but also having a group of players that is definitely highly committed to the cause, physically fit, which I don't think they were last season. And the kinds of characters in the squad like Ivan Keleva, who, regardless of how good a goalkeeper he is, seems to play off the fans, and their response seems to be a big part of his character. And yeah, I mean that for me, I think is what's important to Victory fans this season. A team that is committed and cares as much as they do.
Sorry, it's actually interesting to see the Keleva's big Balkan energy is influencing Balkan banners behind the goals at games. For the eagle-eyed among us, basically there was one banner in the mother tongue saying "You hate us and we don't care." I think it was. I was able to see Vinas Mirus there, which means like you hate us. But you could put 2 and 2 together. There is a let's say uniformity of purpose with Victory, which is something that has been galvanizing, especially for wanting to build such a defensive base initially. And that was probably looking at how goals were conceded, or the second goal was conceded specifically. Viet kind of exacerbated that. And in a competition where this competition that has already become which coach won't shoot themselves in the foot, Popovic is kind of allowing these unforced errors to happen around him,
giving his opponents enough rope to like that's very effective in this league. Clearly this approach is working for Victory. Teo, where do you think it went wrong for Adelaide in this one?
You've highlighted in previous weeks. I think Isaias wasn't ever really the answer in midfield. They definitely had issues with Tratt at right back, and from an attacking productivity point of view, not outstanding from Goodwin. Yengi, I think the dive and getting booked for it got in his head a little bit as the game went on. So those were all factors for Adelaide. But again, we've described them in previous weeks as the middle market team. And I think they were quite reliant on the sort of the blood and thunder and the emotion of the home crowd to lift them in this game, and ultimately didn't have the quality to deliver purely running on that emotion by the end of it. I think Victory's first goal for Marjotta, you don't see, I don't think, goals scored like that very often. It just seemed very simple with the way play broke down and the defenders and the keeper fell out of the way for him to just casually roll it in. And a good finish, but you just don't see a goal scored like that very often. And then Velupile had his opportunity, which he took only 10 minutes after coming off the bench. But I think the other player I wanted to ask about is Robbie Cruz, because he's up to 3 substitute appearances and 52 minutes of action for the season. How does his role evolve from here? Or is this the Robbie Cruz that Tony Popovic wants to use for the rest of the campaign? And is Robbie Cruz going to settle for that? Because if it takes him 5 games to play 90 minutes, I don't know if, while he's trying to manage his body, I don't know if that's going to satisfy.
Yeah, it's all a matter of circumstance, I guess. Let's say how fit. Like, I think it's become evident that he will play Brimmer as that advanced midfielder / second striker. Rojas's fitness is also a very important dynamic in all this. But I think Cruz will nevertheless be effective in this circumstance. And that, let's say, that second goal, irrespective of how Adelaide lost the ball in that circumstance, Falami, Cruz and Velupile all combined really well. Falami's ball was actually really good in that respect. He held it off. Not just the fact that he held off for Cruz to make the run, but he was actually able to weigh the pass adequately on the run, so Cruz could just hit it first time in the box and put it across goal. But yeah, that first goal, like, speaking of Trat, like, that was rather negligent defending. The ball pops up in the air from Rojas's ball back across the box, and he goes to defend the line, even though the ball's taking eternity to come down, and he could have just pressured, Majota's shot on goal. While Delianov was basically a sitting duck on the goal line. It was a game of moments.
I noticed that Trat was often getting caught up field because he's not mobile enough to play out there, and then Isais kept having to slide across to cover, and Falami gave him nightmares. But I think that was as much down to Trat's performance as it was Falami's, and just bad positional defending, and sometimes even the wrong stance and showing him inside when he shouldn't, and just basic stuff. And there's some question marks about Adelaide's defensive recruitment. I think. I mean, we've picked apart the midfield problem quite a bit, but Nick Ansell doing his Achilles, which, given his injury history, I mean, I feel bad for him, but he just gets injured at time and time again. Is Jacob Tratt really any better than what they have in the local NPL in South Australia? I think Lockie Barr is overdue a look in at A-League level, and must be frustrated by watching this unfold in front of him.
I think that Adelaide are going from Ryan Strain to Jacob Tratt at right back, and within the space of, let's say, a season. And like you're saying, the recruitment hasn't been optimal, but I think, like you alluded to, the midfield is a primary layer in all this, because defenses ultimately live and die off the pressure their midfields apply and relieve. Adelaide's midfield is just so singular in approach, and Adelaide as a team, outside of Melbourne City, they're probably the P&P ultimate team of the league, and they're gonna press, they're gonna run, they're gonna do a lot, they're gonna circulate possession, and that's it. And so you're going to get a lot of cross spamming. Craig Goodwin, he's a winger that never was able to dribble one-on-one. So you're only going to really get a certain, a singular impact from him. And unless he's, scoring bombs, I don't really know what he's providing. Stephen Moore, what is he providing outside of, late runs into the penalty area? Dorigo's only really providing circulation. Isais is only providing circulation as well. So this has been a team that has long been reliant on Ben Halloran. And however much Ben Halloran can do that, it's all very relative. And so, I don't know.
It's all a bit Atlas for Ben Halloran at the moment, holding up the rest of the team. There was one touch early on in the match that went unremarked upon by the commentators, and I thought it was unbelievable. There was a big switch over to the right-hand side, to the touchline. He had Davidson right with him. He was running at full pelt, and you just cushioned it perfectly out in front of him and just didn't even slow down at all. Like, he was running full pelt and just cushioned the ball and kept going, and ended up getting to the byline, getting a good ball in. It was just magnificent. Why hasn't he been called into the national team setup? Ante, why is he gone so underused? Just doesn't
Goals.
Stat pad in the A-League?
Goals. If he scored more goals, then and just one little observation. I wouldn't say it's Atlas, but I'd rather say it's Sisyphus.
a couple of points from me. One on Yengi, who was yellow carded for simulation, and as always, the coach has to come out and say he's not a diver. I don't know what your thought was that on Teo, but the other thing that really irked me was Jason Davidson's reaction to his red card and the way he got into the official's face after it was given. And apparently he sprayed the fourth official on the way out as well. And I honestly think, despite it being 2 yellows, he should get an extra week or 2 for that. You got to accept the decision. And that, to be honest, I that left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth.
I mean, it didn't for me, because it's probably no less than what I would have expected in the heightened tension of the game in the situation. Yeah, overreaction. Yes, he'll cop his penalty. Are we 100% sure it was the second yellow?
I mean, he stood on him.
I am.
He started him.
He got him. He clipped him.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing that on a yellow. Quite simply, you shouldn't, like, if you're on a yellow, you don't leave yourself in the hands of the referee in that kind of situation. However much you want to win the ball, you can apply pressure in certain ways, and you don't necessarily, you can still deny them from turning, if you're on a yellow card. But yeah, it was hasty, but it was, how much of that was part of the let's say the energy that was evident in the game as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, do we want to look at his suspension in the context of the fact that they play Melbourne City immediately next, or do we want to talk about his replacement in the context of who Melbourne Victory replace him with, regardless of who the opponent is? Because both of those are factors in who they choose, because I assume it's going to be Matt Leckie that his replacement has to mark in the next game, which is not ideal. So,
yeah, it'll probably be Steph Negro playing left back, I'd imagine, which, he can capably reinforce the flank without, providing much of an attacking threat, because he doesn't really have a left foot. But, I'm not sure that Davidson's reaction can be excused by the tension in the game, to be honest.
Do they go?
Well, no, but it won't be excused from the point of view that he probably will get the extra week's suspension.
You do think he'll get punished, do you? Because I don't.
I do, but I'm excusing it in the sense that I think Victory will just take their licks. They may not look to internally discipline him any further for it. They'll just cop the extra week. I think that it was all done in the service of winning the game. Let's not forget. Maybe the reaction would be different if they didn't win. So,
I mean, it could be Broxham at left back next week.
Could be 3 at the back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one for Popovic to mull over. Let's move on from Victory Adelaide and go on to Newcastle 4, Wellington 0. A huge win for the brand here at the National Curriculum. But more importantly, are we going to see a more impactful man of the match performance than we did from Mikkel Tadze in that game, Ante?
As I mentioned in the first episode of this season, he's the closest thing to Bruno Fornaroli that we have seen in this league.
Since early Bruno at City,
like Bruno first season at City, for example, taking the mickey out of defenders and making them look like amateurs. He's really, really good, and both incorporative, gets on the end of opportunities as well. But I get the impression that they don't want to be relying on him with Newcastle. You could see that in however much that was born of the circumstances of the game in isolation. You could see in terms of how they were incorporating their wingers in play. But I think primarily this was a very well executed game plan from Newcastle. The kind of lingering thought about this is you don't want it to be a flash in the pan.
Well, Teo, I thought it was marvelously entertaining stuff. The first goal, 9 outfield players involved in the move. Is Pappas ball bearing fruit at last, and in terms of results? Because we've been highly complimentary of them all season.
Well, I think so, because Pappas, in his own words, said that he thought that the preseason was long enough that he expected no rustiness and for his team to hit the ground running straight away. The problem is they got undone in that FFA Cup tie by 2 goalkeeping mistakes, and they've been undone conceding pretty much all of their goals due to criminal defensive errors to start the season. So as soon as the errors stopped, I think that level of confidence in the Newcastle team, that the way they were playing was already in season and ready, was going to flow through them. And I know I've been trying to sell off members of this Newcastle team, but Daniel Pena is on his 7th loan from Atletico Mineiro, and this one is working in a nationally televised league, internationally televised league with English-speaking commentators. And my question is, and I know I said this about Macarthur as well, if he plays too well, he will end up. Newcastle have done all the hard work to scout him and settle him in Australia, and they've just put him in the shop window for one of the other A-League teams to come and get him. But from Atletico Mineiro's point of view, now that Pena is working somewhere, are they going to sense the opportunity to cash in, and could it be as soon as January? Because as great as it would be for him to serve out the rest of the A-League season, I'm worried that he's playing too well, and Newcastle, without an owner, because they're jointly owned by other licensees, may find the money, may not have the clout to keep hold of him if Atletico Mineiro want to sell him.
So what? Like, the very point of squad composition is to find value where value isn't, let's say, perceivably found. If you can scout well, like, players can be replaced. Okay, certain players in the world of football can't be replaced. However much they, like to, let's say, continue that idea in the A-League, even though, like, every player in the A-League is replaceable. Let's be honest. They'll be fine without Daniel Pena or Bekemi Kultadze. They'll be able, because you can find others like them. That's just the onus on the scouting department and whoever makes decisions from that standpoint. But I think something that we do have to take into account with this game was just how they identified Wellington's weaknesses. Because defensively, I think they have very, very specific weaknesses in terms of structure, and you can see that with Sydney as well, because they defend in a very similar way. Let's say within 25 meters of goal. And there was one game against Perth during the bubble, and Fornaroli was really able to exploit in a similar way, drawing the centre backs out, receiving the ball in certain areas between the fullback, winger, and one of the midfielders. So they have certain pinch points, and if you receive the ball in those areas, like that defense will collapse. And that was probably evident in the third goal that they scored. However much confidence flows through the veins when you're up. Sorry, I should correct myself, because when teams are up in the A-League, they tend to defend. But with Newcastle, you could see they were very confident in understanding the areas that they had to play into. And you could see from the halftime sub, basically with Sotirio coming on, that Teller didn't know what to do. And his only resort was, we need more pace, we need more power.
Well, but I wanted to I know Wellington are the defeated team here, but I haven't been convinced, even in the games they won, by Rufer and Lewis as a central midfield pairing, because I think they play similar roles. But Rufer adheres more to his role, which pushes Lewis further up the pitch and forces him to play more attacking passes and attempts to create more play, which I don't think is his wheelhouse either. And he was replaced by Pennington. And I wanted to know, what's your opinion on Pennington, and does Tale have to break up that duo if he wants to be more competitive in other games?
I don't necessarily think the issue is Lewis or Rufer. I think it has to do with further up the pitch, because I don't think there's any real great connection between Hooper and Ball. Ball hasn't really locked down a spot. He's playing a lot of times as one of the attacking midfielders. He's played, just the same amount of time up front. And Luka Prusha is kind of finding a similar level of, let's say, Luka Prusha is similarly on the periphery in a way that Mirza Muratovic was last season. And they could do with some minutes, because they probably could make an impact. However, Wellington are probably going to be bringing in a foreign signing soon enough. That likely won't happen.
A couple of things I liked from Newcastle in this game was the way that their fullbacks tend to underlap or make runs into the box, and that causes an already very square and narrow Wellington Phoenix defence to collapse even further. And it was evident on the first goal when Hoffman's run brought, I think it was McGarry playing at left back. He ended up following him inside, and then Bumal realises there's an acre of space out on the right to get that cross in for Macarthur. And then obviously on the second or third goal, whenever it was that Murnane scored, you know, and you like your left back rocking up in the box like that is, it's good fun. But just on the Pena thing, I mean, I love watching him because he's a threat to shoot from anywhere, and that strike, I think it was midway through the second half, which swung like a Wasim Akram delivery onto the apex of goal, is just remarkable. That would have been goal of the season. That was shades of Carlos Hernandez against Gold Coast United all those years ago.
Teo, you gonna go?
Josh has said it perfectly. Well. So the other thing is, you mentioned Murnane, and he starts this game. Dane Ingham goes to the bench. Hoffman came off during the game as well. So there weren't defensive errors in this game, but they've got Macarthur next, and we know that Macarthur's going to be a different defensive test to what Wellington were. But Macarthur have also punished mistakes effectively from their opponents this season. So. Do we still have our suspicions over Yerman and Elsie and the Newcastle defence, or does this sort of coming of age moment for the team, first win of the season, let's not forget, does this now galvanise them and maybe the mistakes become less frequent, or they're not as punished as ruthlessly going forward? Because that's probably, you don't want this to be a false dawn against a potentially, one of the bottom 2 or 3 opponents, and now they're going to go and play the team that's on top of the league. So does it change for Newcastle from here?
I wouldn't want them to get carried away. And I was a little worried by Daniel Pena's celebration. First, the humble prayer hands, and then a bow with a flourish to all 4 stands in the stadium. Suggests that the lid is well and truly off in that squad.
No, but I mean, let them enjoy it. I mean, they would be frustrated at not having won until this point. But I don't know if it's a mental thing as much as it is an ability thing to stop those mistakes happening into future games.
Ante,
someone's at the door. I'm actually going to have to give it a minute. Sorry.
All right, Ante's going to step out. And while he does, let's move on to the Sydney teams, both of whose managers are under pressure. Teo, Steve Corica's men going down 2-0 to Central Coast. The Moresh redemption story, a goal and an assist after you smashed him last week. So maybe hang on.
That was an own goal now. It has been taken off him. I believe that. Yes, I believe the graphic at the end of the game said it was an own goal. But no, fair enough, because last week I did criticise his goal-scoring instinct in the 6-yard box after it didn't work out particularly well for him against Macarthur. And regardless of whether this is his goal or an own goal, but it seems as though it is an own goal for now, for Caceres, he's the reason it went in the back of the net because of his movement and his ability to get in the right position. So fair play to him. This was one of those classic games that's decided in the first 20 minutes because of one team starting strong and the other team really not being able to do anything about it. Arenya's goal was pretty simple in its construction as well. I do wonder how big a factor was Sydney FC going 120 minutes in the Cup against Macarthur during the week. A lot of the players that played 120 in this game started. Maybe they thought that Mariners' form and Mariners' injuries were going to leave them in a position where they could afford to roll in and do that, or maybe more reflective of that is the criticism that's coming from Sydney FC fans that they've found themselves in a rebuilding season and they're having to launch into a rebuild that the club administration itself may not have been expecting, or perhaps weren't letting on was coming.
I mean, the Sydney fans seem to think that, judging by a few of the podcasts and fan accounts that I've been looking at today on Twitter, seem to think that maybe they do need this refresh, that the kind of system has got stale. And I thought it was a little telling for Steve Corica to sub off Bobo, Ninkovic and Burgess in a triple change at halftime, not to flip the script, but seemingly to admit defeat and rest his star players as we welcome Ante Jukic back into the fold.
We're talking Sydney?
Yes. The halftime subs, Ante. Was that Was that just rest? Was it trying to send a message, or was it, as I suspect, a bit of an admission of defeat from Steve Corica?
Does he even know how to adjust? Like, I don't think he like. I think we're at the throwing proverbial at the wall to see what sticks phase already with Corica. And it was so, let's say, interesting. And I was talking about this during the game as well. How deep Ninkovic and Burgess had to drop compressing the pitch because they couldn't get out of their own half. And Ninkovic and Burgess are effectively having to shoulder the blame for that, with it, as what the halftime sub might suggest. It's unfortunate that Neuenhoff was unavailable for this one, but even if he was fit, would he be playing?
I mean, it doesn't seem so based on the previous fixtures. It seems like Rattray and Caceres are the preferred duo in the absence of the injured Luke Bratton.
And he's the best midfielder at the club, including Bratton. Like, he should be starting irrespective of whether Bratton is fit or not. Neuenhoff is frankly the best midfielder at the club. And Caceres is not a central midfielder. Bratton is a big loss for them. With familiarity, his range of passing, like, it matters in this setup because they do have to be able to really get the ball out quickly to their fullbacks. I don't think Ryan Grant's absence for this one, however unfortunate it is, I don't think it's determining how Sydney performs in possession, and that's where we really get to see Corica under the microscope now. And this was always the case. It's not necessarily a change in dynamic for Sydney. This is how they've played for years. Like, it's seemingly finally the pennies dropped for everyone else.
Well, I mean, Joey Lynch was talking about a couple of weeks ago that it's the onus is on the rest of the competition to force Sydney to change, and that might finally, after all these years of Sky Blue dominance, be happening. Just maybe. Teo, let's talk a little bit about the Mariners.
I had one question from when Ante was away. How convinced are you, or otherwise, by Maresh? Because I'm not, and Josh was keen to highlight his goal and assist. I was keen to highlight that it was an own goal, but Parish was still a factor in that goal being scored. I'm just not 100% sure that he's of such a high standard that he's a player that you can say, yes, they've absolutely nailed that foreigner signing. Yes, he deserves to start ahead of Matt Hatch, but I'm not convinced by him yet.
Look, he's probably better than playing Nisbet as a second striker, for example.
I agree with that too.
I think there's a pretty large disparity between his good and bad moments, and we'll be able. I think it's too early to tell, but with respect to what he can do at the Mariners. But yeah, there are other players at the Mariners who are pretty interesting and who have been performing at a pretty consistent level.
Well, but one of them who has been consistent, but he's also been consistent in getting subbed out, is Cy Goddard. So he has flashes. I think the first 10, 15 minutes is when you can expect him to look his best, because that's generally when he pops up in the attacking third, makes an aggressive pass. He tends to fade out of games, though, and I guess it's good that his ego isn't in a position where he insists he's a 90-minute player. Or either that or Montgomery has the command over the squad to remove him at whatever minute he may do in the second half. But again, is that just him building a fitness base in the first month of play? Is Cy Goddard going to become a 90-minute player, or is he a bit too flighty to be someone that consistently plays 90 minutes?
Oh, that's on me to answer. I'm currently unsure because it's not like. And they were talking about it during the broadcast, like, oh, Mariners are really high. They have this high intensity, but they're not really an intense pressing side. Like, a lot of this was born of Sydney's inability to play out. Yeah, like
it's a mid-block of anything.
They exactly. And that was evident even from the first game of the season against Newcastle. Like they're pretty conservative in approach, because you can be aggressive defensively. Like, just because you're reactive doesn't necessarily mean that you're pragmatic, for example. But I think, with respect to Goddard, it might be too early to tell. Like, the Mariners are really enigmatic. I don't necessarily know what they are, because who they've played is also, hazy, like creates a haze of, evidence.
Well, I mean, they've also had injuries. We haven't seen Matt Simon once. Harry Steele's gone from 1 minute off the bench in round one to starting and playing quite an important role in this game. So some of the injuries and suspensions they've had have forced them to mix up their squad. And I thought they were on a hiding to nothing coming into this, but perhaps Sydney playing 120 during the week and their own decline means that all of a sudden they arrived right for the picking in this game, but not without testing Mark Birighitti along the way, Josh, and that's something you wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. It seems like every game, Mark Birighitti makes one or two just miracle saves. There was one down low to his left that was just a fantastic stop that he clawed out at the bottom corner. And, I put it out there on Twitter that he's the best goalkeeper in the A-League, and he should be, if anyone from this division is in the frame for making a Socceroos squad, it should actually be him. Mixed reception to that. Someone coming through saying, not the way he's been flapping at crosses this match. No way.
Yeah, that might be the only pitfall with respect to Birighitti, because with his feet, he's exceptional. And reflexes, his ability, like his save-making ability, is also very good. Presence in the box is the one concern, though. And I'm not entirely against the idea of Birighitti being the best local keeper in the league, but for international level, it might be too big a jump.
Well, and speaking of international level, no Tongic, Daniel Hall deputised, and Josh, you were quite impressed with him. And I've got to say, I find him to be one of those players that does fly, even though he's large in stature, he is one of those players that does fly under the radar a little bit. So I'm intrigued as to what caught the eye about him in this game for you.
I just thought he was quite confident with the ball coming when he had to play. He stepped into midfield quite nicely. I mean, he's pretty inexperienced at A-League level. He's probably going to play for Fiji. I don't think there's really any Socceroos buzz about him. I don't believe he's made his debut yet, but I was just quite pleasantly surprised, because I've seen him a little bit last season, and I thought he was a little bit more panicked. Maybe it's to do with the structure ahead of him, but he seems to be settling into professional football quite nicely.
Well, do we move on to the other coach in trouble?
No one with anything to add on Dan Hall. Yeah, let's go.
No, you basically got it in one, man.
Western Sydney Wanderers 0, Macarthur 2. Carl Robinson, how much longer does he have left in this job? Because we said pre-season, there are no excuses with this squad for this manager. He's shaped it in his own image. He's got an absolutely stacked lineup. Why isn't it working?
This was something I did hint to. I don't think you might have good individual pieces, sorry, just to be clear on the pronunciation on that one. But they're imbalanced, and you also have really bad players on an individual level as well as really good ones. Like I don't. Okay, on a primary level, one, I don't know why Troyer was brought in. I don't know why Bernie Abidi is a starting striker in the A-League. I don't know why Aquilina starts ahead of Tate Russell. That Tate Russell played on the wing against the Apia during the week, while Tasmo Dakutas played as a DM against Apia, is just as indicative of how Robinson sees them. Like, to use that quote from the great Lester Freeman on The Wire, like, all of the pieces matter here. And so this, the midfield hasn't been great either. I think we have to accept that. Ugarkovic and Antonis, along with who plays with them, hasn't been optimal. especially with how Antonis is used in relation to Ugarkovic. But then, last night as well, having both Tracy and Petrados on the pitch, like, are they ever going to receive the ball in a way that will allow them to turn towards the opposition goal? Like, they're always receiving with their back facing the opposition goal, and they're always taking their first touch away from the opposition goal. It's so infuriating, and it like negates or nullifies anything that the midfield can provide. Kejiro Ogawa is the one, let's say, signing outside of Ugarkovic and Antonis that has been even remotely okay. Like, there's just so much wrong with this team, and it's actually impressive to make that midfield, or the pieces that you have in midfield, so ineffective.
Are they in a death spiral, or is there something that can be done? The cup, A-League managers that lose cup games to NPL teams generally tend not to survive them either in the immediate or medium term. But away from that, which was 11 changes to his league team from the previous week, is there anything plausibly that could be done to turn this even in the short term? Because it feels as though, the fan base is revolting, and it has to be next week. It's not even a case of give it 3 games, give it a month. It has to be next game that they start to see a turnaround both in performance and results.
Get mutual with Hemid, get mutual with Abini, get mutual with Troisi, get mutual with Petrados, play Najarine, give Kejiro Ogawa more scope, give Lepone more scope as well.
So nothing radical then.
Nothing at all. But no, this is, we're already facing a clean out, and Robinson has already rebuilt the squad in his image. Like, this is negligent in how this squad has been put together is completely negligent. But it's also indicative of how much power coaches have in the composition of squads, which is a completely illogical way of composing squads, because they're not conditioned psychologically to put squads together. I think they're too affected by how things happen for them on a results basis, and so that leads to known quantities being signed. And I'm not going to touch the whole thing with representation, Carl Robinson, but there are players in that team who frankly shouldn't have been signed to begin with.
I have nothing to add on Wanderers, because I agree that there's only the most radical solution could be one that you can attempt to sell in the short term, which is all they've got. My real burning question after watching this game was, how did Macarthur lose their cup game to Sydney during the week? And I realised it was 0-0 after 90 minutes. And so again, yet another clean sheet within 90 for Macarthur. And looking at the changes, they played Meredith at centre-back. McGing played that game. Uskok did not play. Mariappa comes in for his first game, and I thought he looked fit and committed, and he looked really engaged and switched on. So if you're going to bring in a foreign player who's in his mid-30s, you want him to look how Adrian Mariappa looked. We're not going to get, I think, any of the muck around that we've had with some of the other high-profile foreign players that have come to the league. Mombua didn't play. Martis didn't get sent off until extra time in that game, and they played Roos up front instead of Lockie Rose. So a fairly significant amount of changes, but I still think the discipline and sort of the identity of Macarthur is clear enough that they, I guess they got overrun by a Sydney FC team that kept attacking, but they were clinging on. It could have been far more than 2-0 by the end of extra time, but at least in the 90, I thought they looked competent. And then I was entirely confident, even after that loss to Sydney FC, that they would still win this game against Wanderers, because I was fairly certain they weren't going to concede, and they didn't. So I guess, Ante, what are your thoughts on why Macarthur is top of the league? Because I'm basing it entirely on their defending and bits of opportunism in attack. Oh, Josh, if you want to go first.
Oh, I just wanted to say that if you can rack up 1,000 passes a game, you're not going to lose many games, are you? So,
no, but I to be honest, I think we're seeing the real Ante Milicic. They've been pretty reactive in their approach this season, and even going into games against, let's say, Central Coast in the finals last season, that was how they worked best. And I think now there's an acceptance of that. Like, because, okay, I'm going to go into certain areas, but if you're a Balkan coach, you either, die a hero or you live long enough to become pragmatic. And the thing is with Milicic, he's just he's gone with three at the back, 3-4-3. It's just 3-5-2, and they're going to sit and absorb and hit on the counter this season. You're not gonna get 30 minutes of possession a game with the lowest shot quality in the league. Oh wait, they still have the lowest shot quality in the league this season so far. Let's just chill on Macarthur at the moment. But yeah, they've given up the third highest shot quality on average already this season. I know we're only 4 weeks in and sample size, but they still don't attack very well because there are certain principles to Milicic's play that just are not conducive from a positional standpoint or possession standpoint. Irrespective of the fact that he's added higher individual quality in the likes of Daniel Da Silva and Ulisses Davila. I think this is how he played, how they played against Sydney, how they played against Western Sydney it can be extrapolated to the rest of the season. Because you can take into account how they played against Central Coast, and that was more of what we saw last season, and that was ours.
If the numbers are saying they're giving up high shot quality, why is it the only goal they've conceded within 90 minutes this season is a penalty? Why is it? What is the reason they're not?
Poor realization.
No one's raving about Curto's performance. He's been fine, but he hasn't been essential. It could be any other keeper in there. But so if they're giving up high shot quality, why aren't they conceding the goals?
Poor realization.
So you think there's just going to be a massive regression to the mean and Macarthur will plummet down the standings?
Not that there'll be a massive regression to the mean.
If their opposition can start finishing their chances?
Because there are teams that are worse than them. I don't think the regression to the mean will be huge, but there will be a regression, I believe.
I mean, they still have quite strong individuals in that defense that will prevent
as well.
It's a pretty expensive and flashy squad that they've assembled. So, you'd be expecting them to be around the top of the league, just based on NRI or based on the investment. Anyway,
I love how NRI has just been without batting an eyelid. It's just been accepted as part of the vernacular now. Sorry, I'm very proud.
The name recognition index for the uninitiated.
Shout out to you, Teo, by the way.
Well, so I'll save this question for when we do our tips at the end. But just put in the back of your mind that it is Newcastle versus Macarthur this weekend. But maybe when we give our tips, I'll ask you then which game style is going to be the predominant dictator of how the game ends up playing out. But we'll revisit that when we do the tips.
Well, as Popovic has shown, as Milicic has shown, you don't win with the ball in this league. So you may as well embrace the darkness. The dark arts, shall we say. Let's go to Western United 1, Brisbane Roar 0.
Speaking of dysfunctional teams in possession, sorry.
I thought this was a bit of a stinker. I did not enjoy watching this game. I sat down for 90 minutes out of professional obligation alone. But my goodness, I thought this was lacking in interest from a footballing standpoint and also just, the general contrast with the Melbourne Victory Adelaide match in terms of stakes.
Well, can I ask you, Josh, because I was commentating women's at the same time. So I've watched highlights back of this, but based on the group chats I'm in, I knew not to watch back the full match replay. But can you explain to me what made it such an aesthetically unappealing game? Because almost every game in the Men's A-League, when cut into a 3 or a 6 minute highlights package, is actually still, captures pretty much everything and is still quite watchable. And I thought that the raw highlights alone, were the other 84 minutes genuinely that bad in this game that the goalmouth action we got out of this game tells a complete lie about how interesting this match actually was?
I'm not sure why it was why it was so poor. I think, and it's one of those 5 p.m. kickoffs in the heat, and there's the fly in and fly out strategy that Brisbane have employed this season, which I don't think is doing them any favors on their Melbourne away trips. But I mean, Ante, I think you're better placed to answer what's going wrong for Warren Moon's side, because Western United have shown that they're happy to shut up shop and win games 1-0 without the ball so far this year.
Yeah, Western, and especially when they're in winning positions, both their shot quantity and quality significantly plummet. And we've seen that over the opening month. But it was interesting, but it was interesting for illuminative reasons, not necessarily with respect to the quality of the game, but just the adjustments that were being made and before and during the game. Because he did go with 4-3-3. He went with Jay O'Shea as the lone sitting midfielder. Steinman saw another week on the bench, or starting on the bench at least. And then how they defended was the primary, let's say, dynamic in Western actually generating their shots in the opening 20 or so minutes. And then once he moved Daly deeper, the passes into Connor Payne and Lockie Wales were denied. So that means they had to actually figure stuff out in midfield, as opposed to Jay O'Shea having to cover the width of the penalty area by himself. And that's how the bulk of their shots were generated in the opening 20 minutes. And they had really good quality opportunities. But after that happened, the game completely closes up. Western get their goal from, Daly turning blind into traffic and then playing a blind pass, and then doesn't follow the run from Payne into the box. I'm not going to be as, let's say, vociferous as I was with Western Sydney, but this team can be much better than what is currently being put out there. And their best players can be used in much more optimal ways.
Why is Steinman getting left out? They've brought him back from India. He had an outstanding spell with Wellington, I thought, really complemented their midfield very nicely in a double pivot. Why is he not performing? Why is he getting left out?
The thing that I noticed specifically against City, even though the result wasn't, or let's say how the game played out in terms of complexion wasn't exactly, bad. Ground coverage between Steinman and O'Shea, with both of them in midfield, becomes too much of an issue, especially when they spread, when opposition teams spread the ball out in opposition. And especially if you are defending with 3 at the back and you do, let's say, go behind their wing backs and attack them and exploit them in the way that, let's say, Melbourne Victory did. I think that's dictated the shift to a 4. But it's kind of missing the forest for the trees, because I think in possession, if they were more functional in possession, I don't think defensively they would have to face as pertinent issues as they are now. Because I think there's in the opening 2 games, there was a disconnect between Steinman and Akbari, who are effectively their 2 best players in possession. However much, Jay O'Shea's distribution is, I'll keep it diplomatic. People like Jay O'Shea's distribution. But he's not necessarily transformative in the way that Steinman or Akbari can be. And Akbari, in the opening couple of rounds, playing in the same role that Dylan Wenzel-Hawes did, was very disconnected. And that's kind of why he started as one of 2 8s against Western United. But then he just basically played as a second striker after 20 minutes because, Brisbane were losing the ball in really exploitative circumstances that allowed Western to transition and play through O'Shea in the way that they did. Like, there's a lot going on with Brisbane, but the interesting thing about it now, and that was something we saw kind of like, I really wanted to keep an eye on coming into this season. How is Warren Moon going to adjust with different pieces? And I'm I really want to keep an eye on this. It's very intriguing to see how Moon is adjusting, like on a week-to-week basis.
Well, one adjustment that I wanted to ask about, having not watched this game in full, is the Nikola Milojevic situation redeemable? Because it seems as though he's been outshone by Demi when he's played alongside Demi. He's been outshone by Ivanovic when he's played alongside Ivanovic. And every time I ask this away from the podcast, people say it's just who he is. He's realised his potential, known commodity. Is this a redeemable situation? And if so, what's the role he needs to be deployed in to actually have a greater impact on games?
Yes, because this is... Sorry I didn't get to this point, but I think a lot of the players at Brisbane and how they're playing at the moment is relative or let's say as a consequence of this disconnect between Steinman and Akbari. And so a lot of how they're playing, a lot of circumstances and situations, they're asking questions of these players that might be asking too much of them. So let's say with Ivanovic, with Milojevic, with Demi, for example, they're having to come to receive the ball in certain areas that they don't like receiving the ball, or where they don't like receiving the ball, and they're hot potatoing that thing. They're bouncing whenever they come in to drop in to receive the ball, and that's probably, I think that can be changed. I think that not just with maximizing the dynamic between Steinman and Akbari, everyone else will look better as a consequence of this, and everyone else will be used in a more compatible way. But that was really interesting, watching them go to a 4-3-3 for the opening 20 minutes and then just going to the stock standard 4-2-3-1 and closing up the game in relative circumstances. But their possession didn't necessarily build relief or create relief for them. They only had 6 shots for the match, had the majority of possession for the second half, and didn't get, anything of relative threat in open play. Looking back at their XG numbers, like XG per shot, they didn't have a shot over 0.10 in open play. Like, that's not good.
How much of this is born out of not having a striker who can receive the ball with their back to goal? Should they not need this?
They don't need it. Like, their midfield can be that good. They don't necessarily need a striker. They can have a striker, or they can have 2 strikers essentially, who can basically pin the defensive line. They don't necessarily need this like really transformative striker. Yeah, it'd be ideal, but the midfield can work in a way that it doesn't necessarily necessitate.
So you want those sort of outlet balls to the wingers to be when they're, running at defenders facing goal, as opposed to, getting crowded in situations where players like Milojevic don't like to operate. I just on Western United, it looked very silly in our group chat when I said, Connor Payne is looking a bit like a fish out of water here, and then he scores a worldie, letting the ball drop across his body. And it's no real knock on him particularly. It's just that I thought the wingback role that he carved out for himself under Rudan was optimal for his skill set, and then being asked to play as this winger who's actually quite narrow in a lot of situations and is hitting the box almost at the front post a lot of the time or at the penalty spot. The ball comes to his right foot constantly. All of Western United's best chances seem to fall to Connor Payne's right foot. And he was able to let that volley drop onto his left, which he's heavily relying on, and hit it beautifully, and it nestled in the top corner. But there have been chances against Victory, a couple of chances in this game, where, it's just asking something of him that he can't do. And I wonder whether they could flip the wingers around and fix this issue.
Oh, Teo, do you want to go on this one? Do you want to tackle this one, or should I?
Having not seen the game in full, only Payne's highlights, I come out of this game thinking that Payne was clearly man of the match. He was central to every piece of goalmouth action that took place in the game. I mean, he himself said he was disappointed with how he played because he felt as though he scored the impossible one and missed the easier ones. But no, you're right to say that in a deeper role where there was less expectation for him to score or assist, he was a good contributor last season. And
and with space ahead of him to break into as well.
That was and we talked about it before this season started. It was like how will the dynamic of not being able to go downhill affect Connor Payne? Yeah. And like you said, they do tend to play very narrow. And it's not like it was only really against the City. It was only really against City where he played high and wide as a means of allowing Diamanti to come in, and Wales occupies the centre backs. But like he's still serving a relatively functional role. I don't find them to be very good in possession. Let's be honest. They, the shot quality they generate is, still primarily best in transition. And however much John Aloisi wouldn't like that as a matter of preference, that's just the reality of how they play. It'll be interesting to see how this goes on.
How is it affected by Prijovic coming back?
I
he's a different
don't
type of player to Wales.
I don't think they're going to be as good defensively as they would be with Dylan Wenzel-Halls. Because you saw in the first half of the Perth game, for example, when they had Prijovic and Diamanti, and Bodnar's having a cup of coffee playing through them. And then, in the opening 30 minutes of that game, you have Prijovic having a go at Kilkenny, Diamanti having a go at Aloisi having a go back at Diamanti, because they're trying to figure out who's supposed to be picking up Bodnar. And I think even if Prijovic is fit, I think they're just better defensively with Dylan Wenzel-Halls, and I think that will be the determinant factor in Dylan Wenzel-Halls is eventually starting ahead of Prijovic.
I would keep starting Wenzel-Halls until there's compelling evidence not to start him. I know he didn't score in this game and didn't really threaten in this game, but I'm not bringing Prijovic back in purely because of his perceived standing. I'm waiting until Wenzel-Halls starts, until his boots go cold before I take him out of the starting team. Because I agree with you that his work rate makes him a completely different proposition both ways compared to what Prijovic had shown. And I think the Perth game is the genius of that, and he's deserved his starting spot since.
Is there a question in midfield with the selection? Because we know Diamanti's place in the lineup is enshrined, but there was a moment, I think it was in the Melbourne City game, where they passed the ball back to the centre backs, and then Lustica and Kilkenny ran so hard at their own central defenders and so close to them to receive the ball that I thought they actually spooked them. They thought they were getting pressed by their own teammates. Like I do find it frustrating the positions that those two occupy, and I'm not sure. There are a lot of red flags with the Krahin signing and whereabouts he is on his road to fitness, if ever. But maybe if he ends up becoming available, or maybe there is somebody, a younger player in the squad, who could mix up that dynamic a bit and provide something different from those two who are occupying very similar roles and positions.
Why do you think the question of possession? Why do you think I question the sustainability of Western United in possession, Josh? Look, I'll be honest. I think, and that was one thing with Lustica. I think he was maximized next to someone like Sebastian Pasquale during the bubble, and last season he wasn't. He frankly wasn't great next to Sanchez, and he was incompatible next to someone like Sanchez, just as he's incompatible next to someone like Neil Kilkenny. Like he next to another, nondescript circulator of possession, he's not going to look very good in a game, and he's not going to be impactful over the course of a game because it won't allow him to, play in a preferential manner. And this creates circumstances for everyone, for the whole collective in possession, and it'll, create an even bigger necessity for Diamanti to receive the ball, and Diamanti is, in possession, is frankly just doing whatever he wants. And so, but coming back to it all, that's why, at least with Wenzel-Halls, they can sustain themselves defensively with Diamanti. Because, Lustica and Kilkenny do a pretty significant amount of work in that respect. And so coming back to that Perth game, for example, because Diamanti and Prijovic weren't going to pick Bodnar up, it was Kilkenny who had to press up onto Bodnar and provide pressure in that respect. And so if they have to, they will defend high up the pitch, even with Diamanti. And so that's probably been the most interesting thing. They're not necessarily a conservative team defensively, or really pragmatic. Even with Diamante, that's probably been the most surprising thing about them. But in possession, I don't find them to be very sustainable.
Well, with the one thing's for sure, with Diamante and Kilkenny in the same midfield, you get a lot of hand gestures between the two of them. Like the work rate with the arms is off the charts. A lot of pointing from Kilkenny, and a lot of this from Dia. And Majota as well, by the way. I don't know if you saw the clip I tweeted out, but
yes, I did.
Just Italian things. Sorry, Teo.
You don't apologise to me.
Yeah, vegemite pizza over here.
Can I take us? I know it was midweek, and Wednesday is now a long time ago. But do we have any long-standing memories of Melbourne City's 1-0 win against Perth? I mean, Perth's played these 3 games in a row against Melbourne. 2 of them they've lost late. The other one we're saying's an aberration because of the Marchena red card and Perth beating Victory 3-0 and Victory seemingly not losing their stride either side of that game. I feel as though they were unluckier to be beaten late in this one against City than they were against Western, because Western they showed no ambition and really set up for a draw. Whereas I felt as though the way that they frustrated Melbourne City, the way that they applied themselves defensively, they probably were good value for a point. The same way Melbourne City will feel as though they'd been knocking on the door until the 87th minute when they finally got their reward from the forgotten man, Atkinson. But I thought Perth were good value for a draw in this one, and they shouldn't be too disheartened by the fact they lost.
The funny thing about this game, it was personally, I think it was absolutely not an unfair result. City, it's okay. The result suits the complexion of the game. But the funny thing about this game was speaking to Garcia afterwards, and okay, there are logistical difficulties that Perth face. And, this is like the end of a road trip in the NBA or the second night of a back-to-back. But the easiest thing, like having the ball in such a situation, is just too hard basket coaching. It was like, we showed a lot of grit, we showed a lot of determination, Like, did it occur to you to relieve pressure with the ball? And City are just City are not exactly functional in possession, especially with that A.S.S front three. But I mean, it was always coming, considering how City were just, basically kept them rooted in their half. And they actually had more shots than City once Atkinson scored. Like, it's just ridiculous, like how conservative A-League coaches are in approach. But the predominant idea, or thought that's run across my mind, like I've been reading The Clockwork Orange, and so the primary thought in that book is it better to choose to be bad or to be conditioned to be good? And that's where I'm at with A-League coaches.
I thought you were just going to talk about prying people's eyelids open.
No. Like, I experience the Ludovico treatment on a weekly basis watching the A-League and the A-League teams in possession. But yeah, you can't legislate against this. This is part of what makes football. This is part of the beauty of football, the interpretive element to football. But the thing about it is, you can be so much more functional in possession. And these coaches are, one, ignorant of it, willingly, either ignorant of it or willingly dismissive of it. And I don't know how much of it is one and how much of it is the other. And that's the thing that's turning my brain into scrambled egg at the moment.
Well, I may as well throw my 2 cents into this, despite having only seen highlights. Get the young boys in. Atkinson, I thought has, in terms of his value per how many minutes he's played, I don't mind whether it's right back. I mean, Galloway's had a decent season, but whether it's right back or whether it's in the front three, I still think he's potentially an upgrade. I mean, Tilio's been getting minutes, but only centrally, which doesn't seem to suit him. Berengay, has to play all the time. Otherwise, they look severely limited. And whether his legs can sustain that throughout the season is going to be interesting. The fact that he got substituted the previous weekend was, I thought, a travesty. It was just
that Tilio came on for him. It was like the like-for-like sub. And so that was actually the interesting thing about the Perth game. It's that he took one of, I think it was Naboot who came off from memory for Tilio, and then put Tilio and Berenguer on opposite sides of the pitch. And that allowed for Connor Metcalf to become even more impactful on the game. And he eventually gets the assist because how he plays, or how he prefers to play, is a lot of that third man run, second phase play. And the second half, once the game opened up, Metcalf was able to have more of a say in how the game was being played. And it eventually told with that deciding goal.
Yeah, I mean, for City, they'll have a weekend off. They have had to relax and recuperate and try and rediscover last season's magic. And, maybe they'll be a bit sharper next week after they all got fresh trims at Ultra Football on Friday. So. Shall we get into our predictions, gentlemen?
Yes.
Western United versus Adelaide United, Friday, 7:45 p.m. kickoff at Amy Park. What are we thinking?
I've got Western winning this 1-0 yet again. As to how early they score the goal, I suspected it may be a second half goal. And Adelaide, it's really over to Carl Viet and Adelaide as to if they want to be daring and take this game on, because I can see them falling right into the Venus flytrap that is Western United if they come into this one with a complacent or defensive mentality.
0-0 half time, under 2.5 goals after full time.
So you're not going to give a result, just luck of the draw.
No, our Liga is just too much chaos. But you will at least know that most games will be under. Well, you know what? I'll maybe even go under 1.5 goals.
So a 1-0. You reckon?
But I just don't know
or a scoreless.
Who's going to make a mistake? Who's going to make a mistake? Thereby meaning who's going to score on the counter?
There's been a winning goal, but for who, Ante Jukic?
I don't know, Josh.
I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw in this one. A little bit of fence sitting from yours truly. Central Coast Mariners versus Western Sydney Wanderers at Central Coast Stadium. Another home game for the Mariners against an embattled coach. What are we thinking, Teo?
I don't think they're getting mutual with the players Ante suggested this week, and therefore I do not see a dramatic change in the fortunes of Western Sydney Wanderers. I do think they can score in this one. I reckon Mariners win 2-1.
Under 2.5 goals. I'll say Mariners.
Yeah, give me the won't back down video afterwards, please. Pump it into my veins. I've had that stuck in my head all day. Anyway, Melbourne City in the derby against Melbourne Victory, the Christmas derby at Amy Park. So it's back-to-back games at Amy Park. We'll see how the pitch holds up. How do you think this one's going to go? Bearing in mind that Jason Davidson will be suspended.
I think it will be a 2-2 draw. As to my reasoning behind that, I think that City, with the longer time to prepare for the game, will come in with a strategy that can exploit Victory. I think Victory tend to play the Christmas derby better traditionally than City. However, I suspect that this one will end all square.
City will have the ball. I'll say I'm not sure whether it'll be I'd go Victory plus 0.5 in this game if I was having a punt.
All right. Well, for me, gamble responsibly first of all, and for me, it is enough rope with Andrew Denton over here. I'm going for Melbourne City 1, Melbourne Victory 2. Brisbane Roar taking on Perth Glory. It's a simultaneous kickoff on Saturday night up at Moreton Daly Stadium, which is Redcliffe. Okay. Look, this is an interesting one. It's a big game for Warren Moon, I think.
this is the toughest game of the round. I have no idea who's going to play well. Brisbane have been, as we know, pretty out of form. I'm going to go back to the Adelaide game, which I think they did dominate for about 80 minutes at home. And I think Perth maybe, setting themselves up to defend or setting themselves up for a draw away from home could backfire on them here. I'm actually going to back Warren Moon and Brisbane to get their first win of the season.
So your prediction doesn't change based on the information that Daniel Sturridge may play a part?
It's no, it does not. Not one iota.
Ante?
I think Brisbane scrape this. It'll be one of those. It's like a win's a win, and they'll just be happy to get that first win. But I think they'll scrape it.
I think a home game will do them good. I don't think the long away trip will do Perth Glory any good. So I'm going to say 2-1 to Brisbane, but with a consolation goal off the bench from the man who will plead for the A-League officials to allow him to play in a do-rag after his terrible trip.
Can I just say, I'm actually skeptical as to whether I'm not necessarily taking Perth at their word that Sturridge is going to play. I really wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. So.
No, neither would I. It might be a token few minutes. There was the noises out of WA, but look, it depends whose mouth it came out of. And if it was Tony Sage's, I wouldn't really put any stock in it. Macarthur versus Newcastle Jets. This one should be at Campbelltown, according to the fixture list. We'll see if the pitch is ready in time. That's a 4 p.m. Sunday kickoff. Teo, the Bulls returning home for the first time this season. Do they keep their run going?
I think they will finally concede a goal, a league goal from open play. I think Newcastle can score. However, I'm also going to say that Newcastle's defensive gaffes are not a thing of the past purely based on the Wellington game. So I think this will be a very entertaining 1-1 draw. I am going to sit on the fence. I'm not going to come out and say that one style, the Pappas style versus the Milicic style, is going to prevail in this one. I think it's going to be a score draw. Newcastle.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Newcastle as well. I'm gonna back our boys in. I reckon it's going to be 2-1. Sydney FC versus Wellington Phoenix. This is at which stadium? Nostrata. Yeah, that's Cogra. Okay. 6:45 p.m. Sunday kickoff.
What game was? It's the famed Arnie Ball Light versus Diet Arnie Ball game.
The Graham Arnold coaching tree, less illustrious than Greg Popovich's.
This is going to be fun. This one.
Actually, I hate to talk a game down before it even hits the pitch, but I think this is potentially a nailed on 0-0. I have no real optimism about this game whatsoever.
Yeah, I've got under 2.5 on this one. I can't pick between them. They're practically the same team.
No, I can't pick between them either because Wellington could be good enough to beat Sydney, but I don't. If it was in Wollongong, maybe, but not at Cogra.
And you don't have the air of inevitability anymore that you do with the the artist formerly known as the Killbots.
Yeah, Sydney's ability to grind out the necessary win doesn't seem to exist anymore. Although, again,
because Nikovic is older than time itself. Imagine still relying on him to win you games. And now it's he doesn't run enough. So we got to take him out. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, it's fine.
He's got a pain in all the diodes down his left side.
Josh, did you have strong feelings either way about that one?
I'm going to say Sydney FC 1, Central Coast Mariners 0, a Lafondra penalty. Wellington Phoenix, my bad. Sydney FC 1, Wellington Phoenix 0, Adam Lafondra from the penalty spot.
Okay.
He's a goal scorer. And I reckon it's going to be a highly dubious VAR job as well. So shall I add that in?
Are you suggesting Soccoopoly?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. I just think this is what happens when Sydney FC are in crisis. It's a law of the universe. There's no rhyme or reason or motivation to it. It's just the way things work in the A-League. I'm going for a return to status quo. And that rounds us off with a lot of football coming over the festive period. I hope everyone's settling up for it. Thank you very much for your company, Teo Pellizzeri.
Can I ask one question before I go? If you're
Please.
Sydney, would you rather make the 6 or would you rather miss the 6 but win the FFA Cup?
If you're Steve Corica, you'd rather make the 6 because then you don't get sacked.
Making the 6 warps the interpretation of like success in Australian football.
But winning a trophy, funnily enough, winning the FFA Cup doesn't, does it? It doesn't count for. But I feel as though it is one of
unless you're Adelaide.
It's one. Well, but that's the thing. What frustrates me about the team. Sorry to go off on a tangent here, but what frustrates me about some of the teams that got knocked out of the Cup, like Wanderers, like Macarthur, like Newcastle, is that these teams have never done anything in the Cup, and to threaten to win a trophy. To engage, to just sort of energize your fan base, to give even just the veneer of success, even if it's not genuine success, because you only had to play 4 games to win that trophy. It frustrates me immensely that we may still just fall into a Melbourne City versus Sydney FC Cup final with 2 teams that don't really need it and don't really prove anything by winning it. But I guess that's why I ask the question, because is the FFA Cup enough to paper over the cracks if Sydney can tolerate a rebuilding year or a year where they bottom out?
I'll answer it like this then. It might, but it shouldn't.
I think the FFA Cup is increasingly becoming more of a burden to teams than an opportunity to win silverware based on the rotations that we've seen in the competition. I also think that the threat of an Asian qualification spot is also potentially a burden. I'm not sure when those AFC Cup spots click on over from the Champions League, but if we thought we weren't respecting Asia before, just you wait until we drop into the bloody Europa League. But I am actually looking forward to the midweek game, Avondale versus Wellington on Tuesday night. That's the other reason I think Sydney might pip them on Sundays, because Wellington Phoenix have to play midweek, and Avondale will be up for it. They've got some fun potential A-League level talents in that side. So I think if people aren't familiar with NPL Victoria and Victorian football in general, it might be a good one to keep your eye on, because there's some good players in that team.
And they'll give teams a kicking as well, because it's NPL Victoria. So
100%. I mean, if anyone saw the Doherty Cup final last Sunday, that was an exercise in violence and shithousery. So,
but I mean, even in an even more pronounced manner, winning the FFA Cup doesn't do anything for Wellington, and it doesn't do a great deal for Ufuk Talay. Do they even want to play this game, or is this just a substitute for training for Wellington this week?
It would actually be interesting. Who then qualifies for Asia if Wellington wins it? Because they wouldn't be able to play. I think
it goes to the next league position. No, I don't think it goes to the cup runner-up. I think it goes to league position. But I stand to be corrected. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like imagine qualifying for a competition that you're ineligible for by winning, the cup competition in Australia.
By winning an Australian Cup competition that you shouldn't be in. Yeah.
If it would be the height of irony if Avondale was to win and then Apia was to beat the Mariners, and we finally get 2 live NPL teams in the very season where they have absolutely no right nor reason to be advancing this far. It would make no sense at all. And the draw just means we've got a really good chance of it happening.
You'd be pretty mad.
Look, we can live in hope.
Yes, we can.
Teo Pellizzeri, thank you for your company. Ante, thank you for yours. And we'll give a quick plug to the absent Joey Lynch, who's got a Robinson on the hot seat piece coming out in The Guardian tomorrow. So eagerly awaiting that one from Joseph.
Quick plug, I'll also have something out on the opening month and trends I have noticed in the opening month of the A-League. So keep your eyes peeled.
Is that one in ESPN? Lovely stuff. ESPN, the worldwide leader, Ante Jukic. Good stuff. We'll tie it off there. This has been the National Curriculum, and we'll speak to you again next week.
Ciao.